The Dark Tower is a series of books written by American author Stephen King, which incorporates themes from multiple genres, including fantasy, science fantasy, horror, and western. It describes a gunslinger, and his quest toward a tower, the nature of which is both physical and metaphorical. King has described the series as his magnum opus. In addition to the 8 novels of the series proper that comprise 4,250 pages, many of King's other books relate to the story, introducing concepts and characters that come into play as the series progresses. A series of prequel comics followed the completion of the novels. The series was chiefly inspired by the poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower came by Robert Browning, whose full text was included in the final volume's appendix. In the preface to the revised 2003 edition of The Gunslinger, King also identifies The Lord of the Rings, Arthurian Legend, and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly as inspirations. He identifies Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name character as one of the major inspirations for the protagonist, Roland Deschain. King's style of location names in the series, such as Mid-World, and his development of a unique language abstract to our own, are also influenced by J.R.R. Tolkien's work. In 2009, King announced an 8th book, The Dark Tower, The Wind Through the Keyhole. December 7, 2009 saw the release of a spin-off online game titled Discordia. As of 2010, more than 30 million copies of the series have been sold in 40 countries. A live-action adaptation was announced in September 2010, consisting of alternating feature films and television series. The project was reportedly cancelled in July 2011, but in October 2011, it was announced that the film was still on track, and that the television series was slated to air on HBO. On March 13, 2012, it was reported that Warner Bros. Was interested in making at least the first film, and would be in prime position to greenlight the TV element through its sister company, HBO. Javier Bardem was originally set to play Roland, but the role was subsequently offered to Russell Crowe. Initial reports indicated filming was going to commence as early as the first quarter of 2013. Warner Bros. Has since passed on the project, but Media Rights Capital has entered talks to distribute it. Stephen King saw the Dark Tower series as a first draft. He planned to rewrite it to eliminate continuity errors and possibly remove himself from the later books, but after revising The Gunslinger, he decided a rewrite for the entire series was no longer necessary. Overview, plot summary. In the story, Roland Deschain is the last living member of a knightly order known as Gunslingers and the last of the line of Arthur, his world's analogue of King Arthur. Politically organized along the lines of a feudal society, it shares technological and social characteristics with the American Old West but is also magical. Many of the magical aspects have vanished from Mid-World, but traces remain as do relics from a technologically advanced society. Roland's quest is to find the Dark Tower, a fabled building said to be the nexus of all universes. Roland's world is said to have moved on, and it appears to be coming apart at the seams. Mighty nations have been torn apart by war, entire cities and regions vanish without a trace and time does not flow in an orderly fashion. Sometimes, even the sun rises in the north and sets in the east. As the series opens, Roland's motives, goals and age are unclear, though later installments shed light on these mysteries. For a detailed synopsis of the novels, see the relevant article for each book. Characters. Along his journey to the Dark Tower, Roland meets a great number of both friends and enemies. For most of the way he is accompanied by a group of people who together with him form the Quartet of the 19 and 99, consisting of Jake Chambers, Eddie Dean, Susanna Dean, and Oi. Among his many enemies on the way are the Man in Black, Mordred and the Crimson King. Language. King created a language for his characters, known as the High Speech. Examples of this language include the phrases thanki, sigh and dantet. In addition, King uses the term ka, which is the approximate equivalent of destiny, or fate, in the fictional language High Speech. This term originated in Egyptian mythology and storytelling, and has figured in several other novels and screenplays since 1976. The term also appears in King's short story, Low Men in Yellow Coats, in which Ted describes its meaning to Bobby. Series. The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Euro 224 pages, The Dark Tower 2, The Drawing of the Three Euro 400 pages, The Dark Tower 3, The Wastelands Euro 512 pages, The Dark Tower 4, Wizard and Glass Euro 787 pages. 1998 Locus Award nominee, The Dark Tower v. Wolves of the Calais Euro 714 pages. 2004 Locus Award nominee, The Dark Tower 6, Song of Susanna Euro 432 pages. 2005 Locus Award nominee, The Dark Tower 7, The Dark Tower Euro 845 pages. 2005 British Fantasy Award winner, The Dark Tower, The Wind Through the Keyhole Euro 336 pages. Continuation. While the series was declared finished with the publication of the seventh volume in 2004, King described in an interview in March 2009 an idea for a new short story he had recently had, and then I thought, well, why don't I find 3 more like this and do a book that would be almost like modern fairy tales? Then this thing started to add on bits and pieces, so I guess it will be a novel. According to King, the idea is a new Dark Tower novel. King said, regarding the Dark Tower series, it's not really done yet. Those 7 books are really sections of one longer one-quarter-bear novel. Stephen King confirmed this during his Times Talk event at the Times Center in New York City on November 10, 2009, and the next day King's official site posted that King will begin working on this novel in about 8 months, with a tentative title being The Wind Through the Keyhole. King noted that this novel should be set between the 4th and the 5th books of the series. The book, titled The Dark Tower, The Wind Through the Keyhole, was announced on Stephen King's official site on March 10, 2011, and was published on April 24, 2012. Illustrations. Each book in the series was originally published in hardcover format with a number of full-color illustrations spread throughout. Each book contained works by a single illustrator only. Subsequent printings of each book in trade paperback format usually preserve the illustrations in full, except for books 3 and 4. Pocket-sized paperback reprints contain only black and white chapter or section header illustrations. The illustrators who worked on each book are Michael Whelan, a multiple award-winning science fiction and fantasy painter. The Dark Tower is among his early notable works. Phil Hale, the only Dark Tower illustrator who created a second set of illustrations for a later printing of the book he illustrated. Ned Dameron. Dave McKean, graphic designer noted for working in many media, including photography and film. The only Dark Tower illustrator to work in photo collages. Bernie Wrightson, established illustrator for 1960s and 1970s horror comics, and also provided the illustrations for King's novella, Cycle of the Werewolf. Darrell Anderson, the only Dark Tower illustrator who used digital illustration techniques. Michael Whelan, returning more than 20 years later as the only recurring Dark Tower illustrator. Jay Lee, an illustrator who had previously worked on the Marvel Comics adaptation of the series, illustrated The Wind Through the Keyhole. Reception. Bill Sheehan of The Washington Post called the series a humane, visionary epic and a true magnum opus that stands as an imposing example of pure storytelling, filled with brilliantly rendered set pieces, cataclysmic encounters and moments of desolating tragedy. Erica Noonan of the Boston Globe said, "There's a fascinating world to be discovered in the series," but noted that its epic nature keeps it from being user-friendly. Alan Johnston of the New York Times was disappointed with how the series progressed. While he marveled at the sheer absurdity of the book's existence, and complimented King's writing style, he said preparation would have improved the series, stating King doesn't have the writerly finesse for these sorts of games, and the voices let him down. Michael Berry of the San Francisco Chronicle, however, called the series' early installments highfalutin hodgepodge, but the ending a valediction that more than delivers on what has been promised. Other media, tie-in books. The series has prompted related non-fiction books by authors besides King. Robin Firth has published the 2-volume Stephen King's The Dark Tower, a concordance, an encyclopedia-style companion to the series that she originally wrote for King's personal use. Bev Vincent has published The Road to the Dark Tower, exploring Stephen King's magnum opus, a book containing backstory, summary and analysis. Stephen King has endorsed both books. Prequel comic series. A prequel to the Dark Tower series, set around the time of the flashbacks in The Gunslinger and Wizard and Glass, has been released by Marvel Comics. With the project overseen by King, The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger Born is plotted by Robin Firth, scripted by Peter David, and illustrated by J. Lee and Richard Isanove. The first issue of this first arc was released on February 7, 2007. A hardcover volume containing all 7 issues was released on November 7, 2007. The second arc in the Dark Tower comic series was released by Marvel Comics. Called The Long Road Home, the first issue was published on March 5, 2008. A hardcover volume containing all 5 issues was released on October 15, 2008. The third arc in the Dark Tower comic series was released by Marvel Comics, and it is called The Dark Tower, Treachery. The first issue of the 6-issue arc was published on September 10, 2008. A hardcover volume containing all 6 issues was released on April 21, 2009. Following the completion of the third arc, a one-shot issue titled The Dark Tower, Sorcerer was released April 8, 2009. The story focuses on the history of the villainous wizard Martin Broadcloak. The fourth arc in the Dark Tower comic series was released by Marvel Comics, and it is called The Dark Tower, The Fall of Gilead. The first issue of the 6-issue arc was published on May 13, 2009. A hardcover volume containing all 6 issues, as well as the Sorcerer one-shot, was released on February 2, 2010. The fifth arc in the Dark Tower comic series was released by Marvel Comics, and it is called The Dark Tower, Battle of Jericho Hill. The first issue of the 5-issue arc was published on December 3, 2009. A hardcover volume containing all 5 issues was released on August 17, 2010. Marvel Comics has also published 3 supplemental books to date that expand upon characters and locations first introduced in the novels. The Dark Tower, Gunslinger's Guidebook was released in 2007, The Dark Tower, End-World Almanac was released in 2008, and The Dark Tower, Guide to Gilead was released in 2009. All 3 books were written by Anthony Flamini, with Firth serving as creative consultant. End-World Almanac and Guide to Gilead feature illustrations by David Yardin. Further comic adaptations. An adaptation of King's novella The Little Sisters of Illyria, titled The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, The Little Sisters of Illyria, was made into a comic series and released by Marvel Comics. The first issue of the 5-issue arc was published on December 8, 2010. The collected hardback edition was released on June 8, 2011. An adaptation of King's novel The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, titled The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, The Journey Begins, was made into a comic series and released by Marvel Comics. The first issue of the 5-issue arc was published on May 19, 2010. The collected hardback edition was released on January 26, 2011. A second adaptation of King's novel The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, titled The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, The Battle of Tull, was made into a comic series and released by Marvel Comics. The first issue of the 5-issue arc was published on June 1, 2011. The collected hardback edition was released on January 25, 2012. A third adaptation of King's novel The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, titled The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, The Way Station, was made into a comic series and released by Marvel Comics. The first issue of the 5-issue arc was published on December 14, 2011. The collected hardback edition was released on June 27, 2012. Discordia, December 7, 2009 saw the release of a spin-off online game titled Discordia, available to play free of charge on the official Stephen King website. The game is a continuation of the original Dark Tower story, following the war between the Tet Corporation and Sombra NCP in New York, and it has been supervised by both Stephen King and Robin Firth. From the website, exploring the behind-the-scenes conflict between the two companies, Discordia introduces longtime Dark Tower fans to new characters and numerous mechanical magical items developed by Midworld's old ones. Over the course of our adventure we will visit many locations, both those familiar to Dark Tower fans and others which we only glimpsed in the Dark Tower novels. While we may not see Roland and his quartet in this adventure, the development team has remembered the faces of its fathers. We have done our best to honor the original Dark Tower series while simultaneously mapping new and exciting Dark Tower territory. Film television adaptation. Initially, in 2007, J.J. Abrams was connected to a film adaptation but later revealed he had removed himself from involvement in the project. On September 8, 2010, an official announcement was made that the series would be brought to both the big and the small screens via a trilogy of feature films and 2 seasons of a television series to bridge gaps between the films. According to a press release from Universal Pictures from October 29, 2010, the first Dark Tower film would open on May 17, 2013. On July 19, 2011, Universal pulled its support from the production of the Dark Tower films and television series. According to reports, the studio was unable to come to terms with producer Ron Howard. Despite this, Stephen King remains confident Howard will see the project through with another studio, and Howard confirmed the adaptation is still on track, noting that HBO will now carry the television series portion of the project. On March 13, 2012, it was reported that Warner Bros. Is now interested in making at least the first film, and would be in prime position to greenlight the TV element through its sister company, HBO. Russell Crowe, tipped to play Roland Deschain, is reportedly still on board. Reports indicated that filming may have commenced as early as the first quarter of 2013. However, Warner eventually passed on the film. Connections to King's other works. The series has become a linchpin that ties together much of King's body of work. The worlds of the Dark Tower are in part composed of locations, characters, events and other various elements from many of King's novels and short stories. References. External links, official website,